Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to you all. Special welcome if you're here for what for you is the first day, and for most of us is the second day of this annual governance conference. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we begin, but just to get your minds in gear again, not that I'm sure they need persuading. Our focus this morning for the first half an hour is going to be on funding. So if you've not, for whatever reason, made your way over to that board and put a question up there, but you have one, just begin to frame it and get it ready so that we can offer them up to the panel in a second. There is no planned fire test today, so if it goes for real, the 4 marked exits are where you head, out onto the street and then to the front of the hotel. Normal stuff about mobile phones, please, if you'd be kind enough to turn them off or switch them to silent. And the theme of the day, really in response to feedback over the last few years, is to have lots of discussion, lots of short input about topics of interest to you. And that's what we'll try and do today. It does add challenges to us, which is just for all of us to keep to time so that we get the very best out of the day. I'm sure we'll manage that. So our first session then is exploring the funding issue, and it's my pleasure now to sit down on the breakfast sofa and pose some questions that we already have from the board, and then invite you to add yours to those. And on my left, I'm just delighted to have Bobby McClelland, Deputy Director for FE and Skills System at BIS, Peter Launer, Chief Executive of the Education Funding Agency, and Kim Thornywork, who's Chief Executive of the Skills Funding Agency. And our first question, which I think I'll, if you don't mind, start with Kim, is about splitting funding into 2 completely different sets of terms and conditions, and how can that possibly be a simplification? I hope that's not a loaded question, or probably is a loaded question. How would you like to respond to that?
Okay, good morning everyone, and thank you for inviting me to your conference. Let me start by saying it's worth me saying, as you know, that the 2 funding systems from the adult side and the young people side are designed to underpin different sorts of priorities. Particularly for adults, we are looking at adults getting into work, getting the right vocational skills to progress in their careers, and supporting employers to deliver high quality apprenticeships. I know the world is not easy and clean at 19. We know there's lots of young people or young adults at 19 that are also accessing programmes that are perhaps designed for 16 to 18-year-olds. So I do know that. To come to the specific on terms and conditions, 2 years ago, for a start, on the adult side, we have only 1 set of terms and conditions, so just to be clear. And part of the simplification was to move from 2 strands of funding, marked learner responsive and employer responsive, to in the new system, in 13-14, 1 system, 1 set of funding rules and 1 set of terms and conditions. We follow the single point of contact, which means for general further education colleges, we provide assurance to Peter at the Education Funding Agency through a joint audit code of practice for general further education colleges, and likewise for sixth form colleges. There's a quid pro quo on that. On funding rules, we are just launching our interactive funding rules. 2 years ago, there was a pile of funding rules, about like that, those at the back could see. We went to a single document last year, and we've launching an interactive form, because we do know, particularly for governors and colleges, finance directors, seeing the evidence requirements and the audit requirements against the funding rules is very, very important. And we hope that what we're providing now is much clearer. However, there is still more to do. We've been working with the Education Funding Agency for 12 months now to simplify the financial memorandum, and we are working towards a single financial memorandum for colleges.
Great, so simplification already underway and further simplification and streamlining on the agenda. Peter, would you like to comment on that too?
Agree with everything Kim said, particularly about the importance of the EFA and the SFA continuing to work together. And that joint audit code of practice sounds a highly technical thing, but it's so important that EFA doesn't send auditors in and then one day and then the next day SFA sends auditors in. So the fact that I get assurance on the way the money's been spent from Kim's assurance program saves an awful lot of time. So that's quite a lot of common thinking and common approach. But it has always been the case that there have been different arrangements for 16 to 19 and 19 plus. They've always been separately managed budgets. Well, I don't know about always, but certainly for a number of years. And that is not something that happened at the point that the EFA and the SFA were created in 2010. On the young people side, we've made, of course, radical changes over the last year, looking ahead to 13-14 because of the new study programs coming in. And these are fundamentally different approach because it's funding the learner rather than funding being attributed to the qualification. And along with that, there's a massive simplification in the MI requirement. It's about the MI requirement is about 2/3 less for 13-14 than it has been for 12-13. And that should bring savings in the system.
Thanks very much. Do you want to add anything to that, Bobby?
Only from a business perspective, we're absolutely committed to the simplification agenda. And alongside all the funding simplification, there's a whole raft of other things that are being done to simplify, including on the data front. So I think it's something that we remain committed to. Recently took a submission to our minister about. He's absolutely committed to it, asked us to keep going with that simplification plan. We actually have a cross-government simplification plan that we share with the FE Reform and Performance Board, on which many sector representatives sit, to actually demonstrate that commitment. And that brings together simplification across both EFA and SFA, but also what the departments are doing, people like DWP and HEFGE and Ofqual. So I hope you see that we have a real commitment to this agenda.
Thanks very much, panel. Whether it's from the individual who posed that question originally or somebody in the audience who'd like just to take further this whole notion of simplification of regulation and accessibility of that. If you have a question related to that, now would be a great time if you would like to show a hand, or if you wanted a supplementary if you'd posed that question originally. Can't see any hands, but that's just partly because there are bright lights on us and we can't see. Just wave at me if you do. If not, I'll move on to the next question. Yes, colleague at the front here. Could we get a microphone to here? And do, as before, please stand up and be kind enough to tell us who you are and where you're from.
Mary McCormack from Lambeth College. This is very much, I think, from a Lambeth inner city objective, but we can see the simplification, but there are concerns that different government departments don't seem to be working together. So I know London colleges have a huge problem with DWP, young people suddenly being pulled off courses or pulled out of courses, so retention is hit, so that at the end of the day there are big effects on funding claims, etc. I wonder what your view is of that.
Who'd like to start with that?
Happy to take that to start with, and to say one thing in terms of intent and one in terms of practicalities, really. As Bobby just said, we are very actively working with the Department for Work and Pensions. We understand the tensions of a department that has got work targets and job targets with a department that's got skills targets. So we completely understand that. And then a practicality, last year what we introduced for the first time, and we're just seeing that flowing through now, is that where someone leaves a college partway through their qualification and gets a job outcome, and that job outcome is recorded clearly and coded, then the college is reimbursed, if you like, for some of the loss in funding, and that's taken into account when the success rate's calculated. So we've made some move towards addressing that in a practical sense, but there will always be more work to do across the departments. And just to finally add, what I'm seeing a lot as I go from college to college, I try and get out as much as I can, is colleges working really effectively locally with their job centres. There's some really powerful initiatives going on in terms of recruitment, the labour market, matching skills to the labour market and getting people into jobs. And, you know, I'd encourage everyone to continue on that, really.
Thanks very much. Do you want to add?
Yeah.
Both of you. Great.
Well, just one sentence. I think there's always been good working between the EFA and the SFA. We both came out of the Learning and Skills Council, so people knew each other. Since Matthew Hancock became the Skills Minister, I would say he's brought a fresh commitment and an ability to bring the two departments together as well. He made it quite clear, I think, on day one, that he didn't expect to see any submissions from policy colleagues in one department that had not been discussed with policy colleagues in another department, and that's been quite refreshing.
Great. Bob.
On the DWP point, I suppose the fact that universal credit's coming along, and we know that that provides an opportunity to actually look at the sort of issues that you're raising, and actually make that stronger link between employment and skills and how they work together.
Great. Thank you very much. So our second question, already tabled, is what happens if loans are not taken up? And its supplementary was, and what kind of modelling is being done centrally by BIS? And I think, obviously, Bobby, we might start with you there.
Yeah. We've done a lot of work in this area looking at the potential impact of loans. We've worked closely with individuals, asking them their views about what do they think of loans. And we've had a surprisingly, I suppose, very, very positive reception. Over 3/4 of them have said that once they know about the detail of what the loan is offering, they're very positive about it. And when we've actually then explained the terms and the conditions that apply to loans, they've been welcomed. So, yes, recognising it's a new policy, we're confident that there is the capacity there for people to take it up. They want to take it up, but of course, it does require the technology, and we're well placed in actually taking that forward, and that's on track for delivery in the next few weeks. But it also is beholden on providers and colleges to think about the role they need to play in actively, engaging with their learners for them to understand how loans can actually enable people to access the learning that they need.
Thanks. And Kim, I guess you must have thoughts on this too.
Yes, I mean, just from the funding angle, the loans facility that colleges have is based on that sort of the work that they did in that space previously for 24-year-olds and above. But it's worth commenting on two things, really. First of all, those colleges, and there's a lot of them now actually, that have a lot of higher education provision, are already linked clearly to the student loan company and are very clearly in this world of marketing to learners and recruiting learners through a loan process. So I think they are probably well positioned on this. There's a lot of interest from the independent sector, certainly, in positioning to encourage people to take out loans. We will be monitoring monthly the take-up with the student loan company. We think we've got all the data and reporting tools in place, and we will therefore actively move funds where take-up appears strong in some areas, in some colleges, in some providers, and less strong in others, so we can get full utilisation, obviously, of the budget.
Great. Let's just stay, if we might, on the loans issue and see if there are other colleagues in the audience who'd like to take different views. This gentleman in the middle here, if we could get a microphone to him. Just coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Flynn from Rosalie Community College in Merseyside. Just a comment about the loans issue. I suspect that the demographic of the groups that will be taking up loans may be similar to those of part-time students in higher education. Last year saw a decline of 25% in student numbers for part-time students in higher education. So there's evidence that the loan take-up in that group may be different from the loan take-up for full-time students in higher education, which has been largely positive over the years. So I think the evidence suggests that there may be problems for the very group of students that these loans are aimed at.
Thanks. Note of caution there. Anybody want to respond to that?
I think we understand that issue, but I suppose in FE it's new, isn't it? And we're talking about people doing higher level skills who actually get significant benefit from doing those higher level skills and actually understanding the benefit they get. So I think it's an opportunity for us as well, because we will actually be attracting perhaps new types of learners that we haven't done in the past.
Thank you. Let's keep going on the loan issue to see if there are other aspects of this that you'd welcome clarity on. Colleague here, and then a colleague on the table over here.
Richard Lacey, East Riding College. What thought has been given to the fact that VAT is chargeable in certain circumstances on the provision of these loans?
Thank
and
you.
Is that going to be a barrier to entry because it's effectively a surcharge on learners that take certain routes?
Okay, VAT, we'll just come back on a second. And there was a colleague on this table here.
Gareth Jones from Newcastle-under-Lyme College. You were talking about information being available to students to make decisions about loans, but my information is that there isn't the information at college level to advise students of the procedures that need to follow. Can you clarify that, please? Exactly what the position is regarding the availability of loans to students.
Thank you. So let's deal with the VAT issue first.
We're just on the VAT issue, very simply to say, we absolutely know this is an issue and we are very actively pursuing it. That's all I can say about that.
Okay, heard loud and clear. Thank you very much. And on the advice and loans issue?
Yeah, there's significant information available. It's been put out on a monthly basis, updates on question and answers for individuals, for colleges, and other providers. So if you're struggling to access that information, you know, please contact me afterwards and I'll give you the links. I mean, the FE and Skills newsletter that goes out widely across the whole sector actually contains updates on that information every month.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to the third question already posted, which is to do with EFA-funded courses and whether or not what SFA reports on is going to impact on precisely the kind of learners who normally benefit from that funding. I think, Bobby, you were going to start on that. Is that right?
On FE choices?
It was more about what's being... I think the burden of the question was if you stop reporting on something, then how can we attend to who's doing it and therefore be able to judge the progression routes that historically have been in place?
And just to confirm that there is no intention to remove 16 to 18 information from FE choices. Okay. So that the FE choices data will continue to cover all available information that's already on there about 16 to 18 and 19 plus. I suppose the point I wanted to say was that, you know, there's an absolute commitment to make as much data as openly available as possible. And we're currently undertaking a review of what data is available and how can we get it out there and more accessible to a whole range of people, so including individuals, but also to other organisations to think about how they might use that information to actually demonstrate the value in new and different ways. I mean, the HE sector has done this, and we're wanting to do it in the FE sector too.
Thank you. Peter?
Perhaps I can add a point connected with that at a slight tangent, which is one very important change over the next couple of years is the changing definition of 16 to 18 performance tables. There's a lot of information about that on the DFE website. I'm very positive about that because it finally does what we've been talking about for a long time, which is establish a level playing field on the measures between all parts of the the 16 to 19 sector. So some very interesting developments, a very clear timetable for when different measures will become available. So if you've not seen that yet, do track it down on the DFE website.
Thanks. And I guess this question is a broader one on reporting data, isn't it, and transparency. So in the same sort of way, are there colleagues in the audience who'd like to go deeper or indeed sideways on that issue? Or is that clear? Let's move on then to our... of course.
Can I add to that? Just a broader point really on further education generally. The freedoms and flexibilities obviously have been given alongside accountabilities. And, you know, because I'm speaking here this morning to governors, you know, we would urge you in this new world, post-Education Act in 11, to really understand very, very clearly what your communities are saying to you about what they want from you. We do think that the further education system is very responsive. The simplicity and the freedoms and flexibilities are not for nothing. They're to enable the sector, as you know, to be responsive, to respond to communities, whether those are sectoral communities, or whether they're geographical communities, or whether they are groups of learner communities. So I know that governing bodies are very rich in local representation, and so we are seeing that really now starting to play well and raise the reputation really of the sector.
Thanks, Kim. One last question that's been tabled then, over to you for questions that have arisen today in your mind. And it's quite a specific one, and I guess I'll start with Peter on it. It's the funding of traineeship and where will the money come from for 16 to 19 apprentices, amongst others. Peter.
Okay, well, let me talk about the funding for 16 to 19 traineeships, which was the specific question. But
yep.
Kim might well want to say something about 1924 traineeships. The first thing to say is that traineeships is not a new programme with a separate funded line. Going back to the first question, I think that would have been a very retrograde step if we'd introduced a sort of a new bundle of funding just for traineeships. Second point to make, however, is that the funding therefore is already in the system for 16 to 19s. We're very well advanced with the funding allocations for 13-14. It's always dangerous to say this like 10 days before the allocations actually go out, but we do expect them to go out on time before the end of March. We're just at the final stage of setting the base rate. So the funding for traineeships will be in these envelopes, and for 16 to 19s, the principles of traineeships are very similar to the principles of study programs, the emphasis on work experience, on English and maths for those who've not got that at 16, and on progression into apprenticeships or jobs. And so the funding's already there. Third point, what this may well show up is that we need to bring other providers into the system, and we've got mechanisms for doing that. We already started last year saying, well, if a provider's already an outstanding provider of apprenticeships, they might want to have a flexible learning contract, and of course we may need to extend that as traineeships falls out in the way that is set out. And then I suppose the final thing to say is that I really hope that this gives the opportunity for more progression into apprenticeships. We know that lots of young people want apprenticeships. We know that employers are very keen on apprenticeships, but actually there are quite a lot of young people at 16, 17 who still got some rough edges that need knocking off, and very often the employer is wanting someone with a bit of a grounding, and I think that's where traineeships could really come in. And I think there's a big role for colleges in this and for other providers in using this new opportunity, this new design of for 16 to 18-year-olds to provide that progression. But Kim, do you want to add on?
Add on to on the adult side. Same story really. Single adult skills budget. We're very clear that we shouldn't be segregating, ring fencing. We want colleges to have the maximum flexibility within that. So wouldn't want to see this as a separate programme line, just exactly as Peter said. But we are in apprenticeship week, so to come back to apprenticeships really, the Prime Minister actually said this week, at the beginning of this week, that all 19-year-olds who are not going to university, his view is we should work towards them being in an apprenticeship, i.e. a job with a really good quality training package. The traineeship concept is to support, again as Peter said, that move from full-time education or jobs that have perhaps been short, low-skilled, through into a job with progression, with the training package that we call apprenticeships. So small programmes, very much involved in employer engagement and work experience. And finally to say, but on the adult side, there are the same tensions that the person there mentioned with the benefit system. And we do tend to find a way of bogging ourselves down in this always. So we need to resolve some issues around the benefit system and how it will work with traineeships, but it will sit within the single adult skills budget as a flexibility really, rather than a separate line and programme.
Thanks. Bobby, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I just think it's a really exciting time. It's a recognition that there needs to be something perhaps that supports access into apprenticeships, and it's great that it's working across the age groups.
Great. We've got just over 5 minutes for further questions of a financial nature from anyone in the audience. Who has one? Yes, colleague at the back there.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Jim Alliander here as Governor of Portland College, a specialist residential college for people with disabilities. In September, the funding for high needs students, as they're called, students with learning difficulties and disabilities, is changing fundamentally, with the allocations being deployed by local authorities. I think there are several risks to this that both mainstream colleges with students with learning difficulties and also specialist residential colleges have identified. One is that local authorities, at practical point, are increasingly losing the staff with the capacity to manage this kind of resource as more and more schools become academies. They also have their own schools with special schools, and they may well be tempted to put the needs of those schools first rather than the individual needs of students with disabilities. And another risk, of course, is that the rather complex funding model for high needs students, governors in the room might not have been apprised of this as yet, that's being introduced, has a kind of cap on it as well. Now, coming from a specialist residential college with students with very high dependencies, quite clearly there are quite significant costs at an individual level there. And so my question, excuse the preamble, but I thought I'd explain it. My question really is the degree of risk assessment that's been done as to whether some of the most needy students in the English further education system will have their needs met in this new funding regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, well actually this is one that Jim and I talked about for half an hour last night, so but I think it's very good to share the issue with the wider group, because I think one of the points that Jim just made is really important, that every college with a significant role in providing support for high needs students should be looking very carefully at this within their own college from the point of view of any risks that might arise because of the changes in funding, which I'll just say a bit about in a moment. In most cases, I think the risks are more for the residential colleges, residential specialist colleges, which are not formally part of the FE sector, than for general FE colleges. But I know from talking to quite a few principals that there are certainly some principals that are worried about whether the numbers will come through as they have done previously. So I say to governors, do make sure that you're alive to this issue and looking at the risks in your own establishment. So that's a little bit of background. A couple of points just to explain what's happening. First of all, who is this about? It's about high needs students from 16 actually to age 25, formerly called learners with learning difficulties and disabilities. There's actually legislation going through Parliament at the moment to reinforce the provision for these students. In FE terms, these are certainly students costing over £19,000 a year in terms of funding, and actually with an average of 50, 60, but in some cases quite a bit more than that. So these are nationally small number, but of highly significant group, a very important group in society that we obviously would all want to do our best to support and give progression to independent living, in some cases into the job market, in some cases into higher education. So that's the group that we're talking about. What's the fundamental change here? It is, as Jim indicated, that the funding for this group will actually move to, or most of the funding will move to local authorities from 1314. And the change that's being made is designed to reinforce an integrated, what's called an education, health and care plan for the individuals concerned. And I'm sure everyone can see by the nature of the group and the high costs of the group that these are young people that need that integrated education, health and care support to get the most out of their life opportunities. So there's a rationale for transferring the funding to local authorities, which is precisely the local authorities best placed to bring together support from care partners and from health partners. And also it's a group of people where the funding is much less conducive to being appropriate for a national funding formula because of the large-scale variation. Some people will know we've operated the funding matrix for many years. It's quite a blunt instrument. So that's the basic change that's happening. But it's a big change, and in any big change like that, it is inevitably, there's a risk of it being a bumpy change. It's quite evident that one would start from a proposition that local authorities would know all the individuals concerned. Well, actually, that does not, and their families. That doesn't always appear to be the case. I guess FE colleges will know that for a whole variety of reasons, people coming into an area, a lot of people come directly into the system at 16 from other parts of the country. So it's not a group of people that are sort of carefully tracked through the system. Maybe they ought to be better identified and better tracked. So there's certainly a risk of volatility. We're working now, both with the Local Government Association and with the Association of Colleges, on putting in place good transition arrangements. We've invited local authorities to say if the funding that they've got is not sufficient for the numbers, if numbers have increased since the baseline. We've invited institutions to come forward with any problems that they've got. So this is a very active area of concern and focus. Again, to pick up something Jim said, we're also looking at the extent to, at any areas where we've got concerns about local authorities having the capacity to do this job well. And we'll be taking that up directly with the authorities and with the Local Government Association. So it's a very important area, a lot of fundamental change. I do think the change is right, but it needs to be extremely well managed and carefully managed. And the object is to provide better support and care for the young people concerned. One last thing, very important thing that will happen in the legislation. It will give young people, and I think their parents, the opportunity to name a provider that they think is the right provider for them. Now, that doesn't give, it's not an untrammeled, I name X and I will definitely go to X, but it's quite a good sort of check and balance in the system. There will then be a panel review process if for some reason the local authority does not agree that X is the right person, right place for someone to go.
Thank you very much. We're at the end of our time, but I can see one hand there, so if you could bring a microphone here, one quick question and then invite a quick sentence of last comment from each of our panellists.
What's Kalbasi Grantham? In providing for more apprenticeship training, quite often facilities at colleges are not exactly up to scratch. Is there a recognition that there is additional funding needed for this, and where would that come from?
Okay, I'll take that. I've got, I suppose, 2 points to make on that one, really. First of all, as you know, there's been a very modest capital programme been running for 12 months, but it was announced that we got significant more funds for college capital earlier, in fact at the end of last year, when the skills statement was released in November. We have asked for expressions of interest for that new capital programme. Those are in now. Very large numbers of colleges have put in expressions of interest. We're going through the first level of sifting. Just to be clear, we don't do that in a darkened room. We do that with huge amounts of support from the sector and with governance from the sector. So over the next month, we'll be going through the large numbers of expressions of interest and working through into detail phase. We are very slightly optimistic that there may be more funds in terms of government at the moment very actively talking, as you will all know, about infrastructure and money for infrastructure and helping growth. So we're slightly optimistic that the further education system will benefit from that. That's the first point. But the second point actually linked to apprenticeships is we do want to see delivery in employers' premises on apprenticeships. We do want to see equipment, particularly at the higher engineering, manufacturing end, that employers have invested in millions and millions of pounds being utilised for training. And where partnerships with particularly large employers are working really well, that is happening. So I think the assumption that all that training must take place within a college is not something that I would support. There's got to be partnerships with large employers on that too.
Thank you very much. Very slightly optimistic. That's a good phrase that was not noticed. And it's last words from Peter and then from Bobby, and then we'll wrap up. Peter.
I just emphasise the partnership word that Kim used. I mean, I've seen excellent facilities in colleges. I've seen excellent facilities in group training associations. I went to the opening of a new GTA facility in Basildon recently, and that was really run by, by employers for themselves, in addition to what happens actually on the employer's premises. Partnership's the key to making this work.
Thanks, Bobby.
I totally support that. Agree that there are a number of ways of tackling this as well. Of course, there's the employer ownership pilot, of which many colleges have got engaged and are supporting employers to also access that. And of course, the sort of new kids on the block, the local enterprise partnerships, thinking about how you work with them and how they actually can support you in actually engaging with more employers than perhaps to date, recognising that many colleges engage with significant numbers, but there's always potential to do more.
Thank you very much. Always potential to do more. Another good portmanteau expression to go away with. Colleagues, will you please put your hands together and thank our panel very much.